I want to riff off conference reports video hung up on hang-ups in order to ask the questions: is it ever appropriate to diagnose arguments in the person making an argument? When, if ever, is it appropriate to assess the value of an argument based on the diagnosis one has given to the person making the argument? Although I don't care in this video to enter into the controversy the conference report and the peach are having with each other, a little background on conference reports video might be appropriate. In Hung Up on Hang-Ups, conference report is responding to an assessment that the peach made of him to the effect that he has sexual hang-ups that are informing his views on prostitution. Conference report feels as though the peach has unfairly dismissed his arguments regarding prostitution because of her assessment of his so-called hang-ups. Conference report's position in Hung Up on Hang-Ups is that even if he did have a sexual hang-up, that is not grounds for dismissing his arguments out of hand. Now, as I already indicated, for the purposes of this video I am making now, I'm not addressing the controversy between conference report and the peach. I'm merely addressing the larger meta issues involved, and I'll be responding to conference report's general statements regarding the inappropriateness of assessing someone's arguments based on one's diagnosis of the person making the argument. Conference report argues that just because psychological hang-ups are motivating ideas and arguments, that is no reason to consider the ideas and arguments invalid. Now, that is correct on its face. It is perfectly possible for someone who, say, is insane to make a perfectly valid argument, and it is equally possible for someone who is the very soul of sanity to make an invalid argument. But what if you have already determined that the person's argument is invalid, and moreover, that there is something about the person's argument that strikes you as aberrant and strange? Is the only interesting and insightful thing you can say about the person's argument is that it's invalid? Doesn't the strangeness of the argument call out, as it were, for another kind of analysis of the argument? Perhaps a psychological analysis? Then suppose that the person who makes the argument has made similarly invalid and strange arguments before. In short, they exhibit a pattern of similar invalid and strange arguments. Are we to think that the pattern has no apparent significance? A significance about the person, perhaps? Perhaps about the kinds of arguments the person might make in the future? Conference report also says, if you discount everything a person says because it originates in a hang-up, isn't that a judgmental position? Certainly it's judgmental if we discount everything a person says because it originates in a hang-up. But now I want to use the word judgment in a different sense and ask, do we ever have grounds for making the judgment that a person's latest argument probably stems from their psychopathology or a questionable motivation? Certainly we do, when the person has exhibited a pattern of making invalid arguments that seem to obviously stem from either a psychopathology or a questionable motivation. And I also think that we can legitimately dismiss a person's argument out of hand and wonder about what is either instigating or motivating the argument when the argument itself is proffered in support of a preposterous position. For example, I don't bother with listening to the arguments of Holocaust deniers because to deny the Holocaust is ridiculous. Such people are more properly diagnosed than argued with. So when conference report asks us, do we judge the quality of an opinion by the motivation of the person making it? That's the question he asked. And he also asked, do we judge a piece of scientific data by the motivation of the scientist? And he asked, do we judge the quality of an artwork by the motivation of the person who made it? Well, the answer to those questions is, depending on the circumstances, sometimes we do, and quite appropriately so. Finally, conference report accused the Peach of engaging in pop psychology when she suggested that he had a sexual hang-up. My sense was that conference report believes that pop psychology is illicit to engage in because it's not professional psychology. Is pop psychology illicit to engage in because it's not professional psychology? I want to suggest that not only do we engage in pop psychology often in our interactions with others, but we should also do so. While it's important to initially keep an open mind about people, drawing conclusions about people's motivation not only informs us about how to interact with them, but it also tells us what, if any, should be the nature of our relationship with them. Drawing conclusions about people's motivations is indispensable to making our interactions with others wise, and at times to making us safe. Thank you.